Hi YouTube, this is Joe Calton with Calton Cutlery. You can find me on the web, caltoncutlery.com. So we got a really exciting day today. We got an awful lot of stuff to get through, and this is going to be a 30-minute video at least. It might be a two-part, I don't know. So, you know, I've been going through an awful lot of stuff on oil stones lately. Your man-made oil stones and your natural Arkansas stones, okay? So, and all of this has really kind of come about because I'm kind of tired of buying diamond stones, alright? So, you know, I used to go through like 2 or 3 of the DMT 8x3, go through like 2 or 3 of these a year, right? Okay, this is the DMT, they call it a Dia-Sharp coarse. So it's a 325 grit, it's 3 inches by 8 inches, continuous surface, right? I used to go through 2 or 3 of these a year. Now that would be in a year where I'm making a lot of knives. So, you know, for me, making a lot of knives never fails, does it? For me, making a lot of knives is, you know, 30 a month, something like that. Okay, so if now that's kind of full time. That's not really something I shoot for. It just seems like when I'm working full time, that's about how many knives I make. Now those are kitchen knives, straight razors, pocket knives, hunting knives, big choppers, you know, you name it, whatever I make, right? So 2 or 3 of these a year really, I mean, at 60 bucks a piece, really doesn't bother me all that much, okay? Because, okay, so that's, you know, $120 for a year for sharpening stones. Well, when you're making that many knives, and you've still got your own knives to maintain, your shop knives, all that kind of stuff, you know, hey, call it the cost of doing business, right? But lately I've been having to buy a lot more of these, and a lot of them, I think last year or the year before last, I went through like 6 of them, right? And a lot of times you get them and they've got like little specks of extra diamonds on there, okay? Now I didn't really say anything for a long time because, you know, because these stones have given me such good service. But lately it's been, you know, it's been kind of bugging me a little bit. I sent some of them back to DMT, told them, you know, what happened and everything. They did send me a couple of stones back, which I thought was really nice of them. And they were a little bit on the nicer end of what I had been buying through Amazon or Midway USA or places like that. But they still, it had already been turned in my head. I needed to find an alternative. Okay, and with the alternative, I'm going to oil stones. I don't particularly care for water stones all that. I mean, I use water stones for like straight razors and stuff, but I'm a little bit heavy-handed for water stones. So oil stones and I seem to get along pretty good now that I've discovered this wonderful stuff called silicon carbide powder. Now granted, this is a pellet tin from JSB, but you can see I've got labeled 36. So this is 36 grit silicon powder. Alright, so we're going to take a look at some stones. So not only do we have like my normal stones, I've got an okay collection, but then I also bought like a half a dozen of them or so off eBay and the local pawn shops lately. They're nice and used and all jacked up, and so we get to see what they look like when they're new. We get to see what they look like when they're all jacked up, and then later on we'll go through taking one of the eBay stones and taking it from a worn out piece of junk into basically a brand new stone that's ready to keep working. So first of all, what we're going to do is we are going to turn on the camera. Now I think you guys have seen, well, I know you guys have seen this before, okay, so because I've done a couple of videos with it. But this is my stereo microscope setup here. So we have got a Amscope, I believe, stereo microscope. I can't remember the model number or what lenses are in the dang thing or any of that kind of stuff. So I think you can look back at the last video that had this if you want the details on it, because I'm pretty sure I put it in there. Anyway, so I spent about $1,000 or so on the stereoscope. It's really cool. It's got the 3rd port, you know, for putting the fancy, my wife's old camera. It's a Nikon 34 gazillion whatever with a bazillion buttons on it. An HDMI cable going from there into the TV. The TV is I don't know, it's the spare TV from downstairs. It says HDMI, Dolby Digital, Emerson, whatever. Okay, so it is usually really clear. I have noticed when I was shooting, I was getting ready to do this whole setup over the last couple of days, that looking at edges and stuff, this offers plenty. All right, looking at stones and grits and particles and stuff like that, we're kind of maxed out on the resolution of the camera and the TV. Now I believe the camera is like a 24 megapixel doohickey whatchamacallit. So it's a pretty good camera. And the TV, you know, looks to me to be a fairly cool, you know, bright, crisp camera. So I do have another lens that goes in here that doubles everything and makes it quite a bit bigger. But all you see, what I see through the eyepieces is really cool, but what you see on here is a blob. So we're not going to do that. So this right here is a piece of it's a piece of grit off of this stone right here, the Soft Arkansas from Natural Whetstone Company. Okay, and we're going to get to that here in a little bit, but that's a piece of the grit, and these are a couple of pieces of the file that I used to shear the grit off of. Okay, so first things first, what we need to do is I need to explain to y'all a little bit about what you're seeing. Okay, so what we're doing with the microscope here is we're taking a three-dimensional object, and then we are viewing it in one single plane and then putting it up on the TV as one single plane. The stereoscopes work really good for this kind of work, which is why I got this kind of scope. But they don't have like the magnification of like a normal type microscope, right? Okay, so what we're going to be looking at is a paring knife, right? Just a shop paring knife. Okay, so we'll bring it in here. Actually, first, let me grab my penny. Where'd my penny go? There it is. So this will give you a size reference. Okay, so let's turn that around a little bit. There. Okay, so, oh, that's right. This camera, when I have it in here, it's backwards. So let's flip it back around, and then this will be right side up for me while I'm showing you stuff. Okay, so there's Lincoln's head of a penny. There's the date. Let's center up the date because this is all the way out. Alright, so then we are going to bring you all the way in so that you kind of have an idea as far as scale. This is why this video is going to take a while. It's all this fumbling and... Okay, so that is the 0 of a 2019 on a penny. Now, let's take our tape measure. And that 0 is 7.5 inches wide. Okay, and in real life, that 0 on the penny is 15 thousandths wide, something like that. Okay, so you're taking something that's that wide and you're turning it into this. So it's a pretty good size reference. Okay, so now we go back to the paring knife, right? And we might have to zoom out a little bit for this. No, this way. Okay, so it's been a while since this knife was... Actually, I don't ever even use this knife. It just sits up on the bench, and I use it for sharpening demos and stuff. Alright, so this is going to be our edge right here, right? Viewed from the side like that. Okay? Now, this is what I want you to get right here, is that this is from the side, and we know that this is going to look, this is what that is, right? Like this. So now if we rotate it to where we go towards us, right there. Okay, so now we are looking down on the edge, down directly on the edge of the knife. Okay, so if this knife was sharp, okay, you would not see any light reflecting along here. Okay, because you're looking directly down on the sharp edge, right? If this side and this side meet at infinity, okay, and there is no burr, you will not see any light reflecting back up at you. Okay, one of the easiest way to tell if your knife is dull or if it's sharp, right? Okay, this also happens not only with a knife edge, but like a point. So here we have the point of a pencil. See if I can find it. That's my fingertip. Ah, there we go. Let's bring it into focus. Okay, so the base of this pencil, first of all, isn't completely flat, and it's not completely sharp because you can see light being reflected off of it, right? Okay, that's very important as to what we're about to start looking at, okay? So, first of all, let's start off with a, this is my Norton Crystalline coarse fine jumbo, okay? So let's look at the coarse side because that's got the biggest pieces. And this is also a pretty fresh stone. In fact, I do not believe that I have even ever dressed this stone. Okay, we need to come in some. Come in some more. Alright, now, what we're looking at here. Let's get you up. Okay, and I need a pencil for a pointer. There's one. Okay. So what we're looking at here is, first of all, you've got, you know, this is the surface of the stone, you know, looking at it flat like that. Okay? So these are all your particles, you know, your stone particles. So think of this stone, this is a man-made stone. So basically they took a lot of loose silicon carbide, you know, powder. Okay, and they put a binder with it, all right, so some sort of a glue or a varnish or, you know, whatever it is that they use, and then they put the whole thing in a mold and they squeeze it and then they fire it or wait for it to dry or whatever, and then bam, you've got, you know, your stone, right? Okay, so a lot of this shiny stuff, you know, that's reflecting light is your binder, okay? Through the binder, you can kind of start seeing the sharp edges of the particles, you know, the individual pieces of silicon carbide that make up the stone. And then you've got spaces in between them, okay? So, and this right here is fresh, all right? Not only is it fresh, but it still has the binder sprayed on the outside of it, okay? So it doesn't really matter right now if this is perfectly clear to you or not, because we're going to take a look at the loose silicon carbide so you see what it is. But just think, this is fresh, right? Now what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at an old one, okay? Now this doesn't have a name on it, but I'm pretty sure that it's either a Norton Crystalline or it's the same sort of stone because it's nice and dished out, okay? Which means it's soft enough to wear away. And that will go over here in a little bit too. This video is going to be a whole bunch of skipping around and jumping back and forth. Okay, now, see, you're seeing the same thing. You can see some of these particles are about the same size as the particles in the last stone, but there's a whole bunch of, it looks flat and plugged up. See all these places where, you know, there's not the spaces in between the crystals? That's because this stone is dirty as crap, okay? It's dirty, it's worn down. Yeah, it's in pretty sad shape. Okay, so now what we'll do is we'll go ahead and we'll tilt this up. This is where, if you guys have got a microscope like that, this little the tilting bowling ball setup is really cool. It's just an old dog dish with a bowling ball that's cut in half. If you do decide to cut one of these things in half, use some sort of a power saw. I did this with a hand saw and it sucked. It took forever. Anyways, let's get you back here. Oh. Now, what you're going to end up seeing is that only a small band of this is going to be clear. And then it's going to be fuzzy here and fuzzy here. Depends on, you know, how I set the stone up in the bowling ball thing, okay? But anyway, you can really see here how all this is worn down. There's a whole bunch of smaller particles here. You still got the big particles, but they're covered and they're buried in the smaller stuff. And what that smaller stuff is it's broken down pieces of the bigger shards and steel particles and old sharpening oil and just a whole, and household dust. I mean, it's a whole bunch of just trash that's clogging this stone up. Now we'll go ahead and go to the fresh stone. Actually, let's grab one that's about the same thickness. Then we don't have to focus it quite so much different. Okay, you see there? See the difference? Now, these larger particles, you can see the whole, you know, the whole grain, right? Because there's not all that trash plugging them up and then, you know, burying these to where these can't work. All right? Okay, so there's the first set that we need to look at. Was the plugged up crystalline and the clean crystalline, right? Now we're going to see what those grains actually look like. So this right here, silicon carbide powder. This is 60 to 90 grit. That's what it looks like with the naked eye. And then we're just going to put the loose thing underneath the scope, or the whole canister underneath the scope. Okay, so I want to say that Norton, or the Norton Crystalline coarse fine, I want to say the coarse side is roughly about like this. Okay, so this is 60-90 grit silicon carbide with no binder. Okay, so it's just loose in that pellet tin. Okay, and you can see all these really nice sharp cutting surfaces on all these individual grains, right? Okay, so, and there's no binder to kind of, you know, make the light look funny. All right, this is just straight up dry. So what happens is that when you have a fresh stone that's either fresh out of the box or has been freshly conditioned, this is what you're cutting with. All right, it's all these really nice sharp, you know, spots on these grains here. That's what cuts your steel and makes your scratch pattern. All right, as you cut, or as you sharpen, okay, the steel is going to start to abrade these nice sharp corners down. Okay, just like when you use a pencil. You know, the pencil's really nice and sharp to start with. As you write with it, it gets duller and duller and more rounded off, and you can't cut or you can't write a fine line. Now you're writing wider lines, right? The same thing happens with this sharpening stone. Okay, once this gets worn in to where, you know, all of these little spots are no longer sharp anymore, now your stone quits cutting. Okay, Now, it depends upon the stone, like a Norton Crystalline. It's got a very, what they call a weak binder. And the binder is just whatever they put in here that holds all these grains together. Okay? Once that stone starts to go to where it quits cutting efficiently, your normal reaction is going to be, okay, well, hey, you know, the stone isn't cutting my knife, so let's press harder. Okay? So you push down harder on your knife to, you know, to get the stone to cut. Okay, well, these Norton crystallines are a very, what they call friable stone. All right, this binder is very weak. Okay, so you'll shear off the top layer of grit. Okay, once you shear off the top layer of grit, you expose the sharp grit underneath there, and then it starts cutting more efficiently. You lighten off your pressure, and you go back to you know, business as usual. Okay. The problem is that the amount of pressure that it takes to shear the top of the grit off varies from stone to stone. All right. The crystalline is it shears grit fairly easily. Okay, which is why you find a whole bunch of them that are dished out like that. And actually, that's kind of a good thing because, like I said, it keeps exposing fresh crystals, and those fresh crystals cut efficiently. You take an old stone, like a natural stone, like this. I think this is a Smith's soft, hard Arkansas stone, and they do not. You know, they're a natural stone, so it's like the binder that's in there is a lot tougher, and they don't shed the grit near as readily as that crystalline stone does. Okay, they're even worse than like the fine India stones. The India stones are in between. Okay, which is why the India stones they hardly ever go out of flat. Here's a vintage one that I have that I already dressed this side. This side right here, I was going to dress the whole thing because there's that hollow in there. I think somebody was sharpening chisels on this stone. And chisels are not chisels and gouges. You know, they're typically you put a lot more. It's easier to put more pressure on it, and then that's what releases the extra grit. So anyway, we need a piece of pink. Okay, the pink Post-it notes. This one's got some oil on it, but I found that I think that's what it was. The silicon carbide, the loose stuff, shows up the best on pink Stickum notes. Of course, that's the only color of Stickum notes I have in the shop at the moment. Okay, there's our Stickum note. There. That's actually pretty nice. Seeing some waviness in the screen here. I hope that won't be in the final video. But this is what your individual piece of 6090 grit silicon carbide looks like. I think we can get a little bit closer. Oh, yeah, that's as close as we get. But you see how you got all these nice sharp pieces? What it reminds me of, looking here like this, is a piece of like obsidian or flint. You know, somebody that something that you use for like flint knapping. So anyway, once these edges get worn down, that piece quits working. That button. Okay, so this is, again, this is a piece of 6090 silicon carbide grit. Okay, the loose stuff. So just imagine that this stone is made up of a whole bunch of those inside the coarse side of this. The fine side of this looks exactly like that, only smaller and finer, and the scope actually has a hard time picking up that small of a crystal in the stone. You have a hard, I mean, it just looks like a blob. All right? So, now that we kind of know what the silicon carbide looks like, and since I've got the scope out, let's take a look at Let's take a look at a piece of fresh sandpaper before I forget that. Okay. Okay, so this here is I think it's Norton, and I think it's ceramic based sandpaper. Okay, and it's a different color that seems to show up fairly well also. Alright, so remember when we were looking at the knife edge, okay, if you look directly down at the knife edge, you don't see anything, right? Because there's no light being reflected. Think of that the same way with this sandpaper. Okay, so this sandpaper is like there's a whole bunch of grains and most of them are pointing up. So like right here, you can see a real light line, right? Okay, well that's going to be where two edges of that piece of ceramic grain meet. Okay, and it's nice and sharp. See how you've got all your individual grains and there's nothing in between them, right? And you see all these nice sharp edges. Okay, so this would be like a freshly conditioned oil stone, right? And it would be either, you know, any kind of them, the man-made or your naturals. All right, so there's fresh. Now here's a piece. Oh, where were we there? We actually had a really good, I thought, view of it. Ah, well. So then the end of this piece, I rubbed that paring knife on it for a little bit. See, there it is right there. Okay, see how we go from nice and clean? Not really any trash. Now, yeah. So you got a little bit, which is probably just dust from the shop. And then all of a sudden we get to the part that I sharpen a knife on, and bam, now we got all this trash in here, right? Now a lot of that's going to be steel particles. It's going to be busted off pieces of this ceramic grit. Okay, and as you wear it, it gets worse and worse, and that looks to be about the center of the spot that I was working on, right? Okay, now if this was just, I rubbed a knife on this dry, okay, so there's no lubrication, nothing to float away the steel particles, right? But still, at this point, this sandpaper, not only is it plugged up, because all this trash is in between your ceramic pieces, but the ceramic pieces have also been, you know, dulled down. So this piece of sandpaper right here, I suppose you could try to wash it, so like if you were wet sanding or something, and that might help a little bit, but this section of paper is completely wore out because because your crystals, all the sharp edges are worn away. Okay, so that's where I'm getting an awful lot. When I say you take a sharpening stone, let's take this, we'll take a look at this one right here. I believe this is a Norton Queer Creek. That color and the grain, it looks like something I was seeing on the internet. So let's put these back in here. Oh no, it's going to be the same color. Let's go back to this. Where are we not finding it? Oh, there we go. Okay. Now see how plugged up and worn down all this looks? So it seems like one of my other videos when I talked about reconditioning, recutting these, or maybe it was the one on why oil stones go dull. You know, there was comments on there of, you know, hey, try WD-40, or, you know, hey, try a different type of lubricant. Well, a different kind of lubricant, sure, it'll float all this trash out of here, or the majority of it, but it won't do anything about, you know, the edges of those stone particles being dull. All right, so in order to fix this stone, you've got to completely strip off the top layer, get rid of all this trash right here, expose good, fresh cutting crystals for it to be able to cut again the way that it should. All right, if you tried sharpening on this right here, you know, it wouldn't be a very good time, because it'd be like trying to sand a knife with worn out sandpaper. Okay? All right. So, I think we've already gone long enough about. Yeah. So when it comes down to it, there was another fellow that had a comment on there saying, "Hey, you know, you're cutting the stone too fine." Well, I was talking about a soft arc at 220 grit. Well, you know, I would much rather have a stone that was too aggressive and it worked too fast, versus one that looked like this, that was inefficient, and that really wasn't cutting the steel very well. Okay, so that's another one of my tests that I've got to do here pretty soon, and that is I think that one of the reasons that I really like the diamond edges so much is because those diamonds are very aggressive and they cut very well, and I think they produced edges that were more crisp because the cuts that they left in the steel were so clean. And I think we'll end up seeing that here on down the road once we start cleaning up some of these stones and sharpening some knives with them, and then looking at the scratch pattern on the edge of the knife on a clean stone versus a dirty stone, and then we start doing some rope cutting tests and stuff. So anyway, so I think this video is right about the end. I'm going to go ahead and shut you off, and then we'll start another one and show you the different grains of a couple of other stones. That one might be a quick one. Anyway, this is Joe Calton with Calton Cutlery. You can visit me on the web, caltoncutlery.com. Hope you enjoyed this video, and we will see you again in just a little bit.